For many years in the studio, we've been regaling Roger with tales of a particular game from Games Workshop's history, which is one that I've had the joy of playing multiple times, and I can confirm it's really fun and really exciting. Now, he's always wanted to try it out, so he's been watching eBay for years to try and find a copy, and he's finally found one that's in good condition, and he's put down the money to buy it as well, and it's turned up, and here it is. Now, he's going to let me open it so that we can all watch what's inside as we unbox it and find out if it is complete. It was off eBay, and we're pretty sure it is complete, but we don't know exactly what else is in there. So why don't we find out together? All right, so the tape's been cut. Let's take a look what's inside. Well, first of all, some foam, lots of bubble wrap, but I can see through it the important bit, which is a classic box that I've not seen since I was 13, I think. Goodness, Rog. He has packed this extraordinarily well. So here we are, a copy of Mordheim, but there's more than just this inside the box, which feels heavier than I remember it feeling. There's also a whole ton of sprues as well, and it looks like some Empire Militia that are partially used. Lots of useful bits and pieces on there. We've got little baggies full of extra arms and things. More baggies full of arms and things, and more sprues. Well, I hope Roger wants to do an Empire warband because there's plenty for it. So here it is, a full copy of Mordheim. Now, I have played this a number of times, but I only ever had the rulebook. I never actually got the box game itself, so it's quite cool to see this. The artwork is, of course, classic, that old John Blanche piece, and this was when Warhammer Fantasy started really becoming grim dark, in line with how 40k was at the time, less cartoony and bright. So let's take a look what's inside, and actually, you know what? This is in incredible condition. How much do you pay for this?
Don't tell my wife.
This is everything still on the sprues. So this sprue here was a little accessory sprue that was for Mordheim. There's all extra weapons and bits and pieces and things. But you can see there's chests that you'd use as objectives during the game, and there's two of them, and they're totally unclipped. We've got the classic whippy measuring sticks. Be careful with those. And we've got the Empire and the Skaven. Now, the Skaven here, if I remember right, are Night Runners. So it's like little assassin ones. But because this is a warband game where you build custom warbands of all sorts of different weapons and things, you can see the weapon variety is quite broad on there, with claws and throwing daggers and throwing stars and things like that. There is the Empire as well down here, and this is the Empire Militia set. So you can still actually buy these for the old world, but it's quite cool to see the complete sprue from the time. Now underneath this, we have a random single base with a slot in, and we've got the scenery. Now, the scenery in this game was really important to it because it would take place in a ruined town, so it's quite close and dense and intense. So you've got lots of buildings inside here, and it's quite a rare thing here. This is why I think you must have paid a lot for this, because all these parts are still on their sprues, all the plastic bits are still on the sprues, and all the cardboard that connects all the plastic pieces is still unpunched as well. So that's quite a rarity these days. Now, there's also down here what appears to be a magazine. Oh yeah, mail order. Here we go. So you can get little accessories and bits and pieces for your warbands. So you can add a few metal characters if you want to expand on it, or some extra scenery. And of course, there is the rulebook with everything you need to play. Now, this game was really cool because rather than just making a normal army, you'd instead make a warband, and you'd name everyone in your warband, and you'd customize what weapons they had, and you'd follow their adventures in this ruined city as they were trying to find Weirdstone. Good things happen to them, bad things happen to them. Very rare to have all your characters survive through the course of an entire campaign, but that was all part of the story. So, yeah, it's amazing to see all this. So, I suppose what we should do is have a go at painting one of the miniatures from the time. So, as it's Roger's set, it's your choice. What do you want to paint?
Skaven.
A Skaven. All right, I'm going to paint a Skaven. All right, here we go, folks. We're going to cut an untouched sprue of Skaven from an untouched box set of Mordheim all the way from 1999.
Wait. No. I can't, Duncan. I can't.
Sure.
Put it down.
Sure.
Put it down.
I must admit, it's a bit surprising just how good a condition this set is. I didn't think it was going to be quite so pristine.
It's perfect.
We could do one of the Empire guys instead from the spare sprues that came along with it.
Yeah, I think we do that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, what state?
Let's go Everland.
Everland.
Yeah.
Yellow and black. Well, that's something different, isn't it? All right, so, okay, I'll carefully hand this back over to you then, and we'll do one of the Empire mercenaries instead.
Thank God.
And whilst I'm building this human mercenary, if you're looking to up your painting skills, then be sure to check out duncanrhodes.com. This is our membership website that's packed full of information and tutorials to really help you improve your painting so that you can paint the army of your dreams. We cover loads of different fantasy subjects, including Warhammer the Old World and Warhammer Age of Sigmar, but much more besides, such as the Elder Scrolls A Call to Arms and A Song of Ice and Fire the miniatures game. We even paint some retro miniatures, including old classic Space Marines from years gone past and some old Warhammer Fantasy miniatures too. And you get access to all of this for just the price of a cup of coffee. So be sure to go and check it out. And here is our human mercenary all built up and ready to go. You can see I've gone for a bit of a swordsman theme here along with a pistol. I think it's a nice combination that works really well for Mordheim. And amongst all those spare bits that we had, there were also some feathers. So I glued one onto his hat because what would an Empire mercenary be without a feather in his hat? Now Roger wants me to paint this in the Avalan colour scheme, so yellow and black are going to be dominant. So with that in mind, I've gone for a sandy brown from the undercoat, which will provide a really good starting point for both of these colours. I'm going to be starting out with the black, and for this I'm actually going to use an off black because this way we can shade it down with some wash later on for some depth and definition. So I'm using some Death Reaper, and to apply it I'm going for a medium-sized brush. This is a size 1 from Artisopus, which is around about the same sort of size as a medium layer brush from Citadel, but any brush of about this size will be absolutely fine for details like this. And with this, I'm just going to pick out some parts of his outfit for the black part of the colour scheme. Now, as yellow and black need to be dominant, I'm going to make, well, I've got a loose plan of making the shirt being yellow and also that feather being yellow, which means things around that can be black. And that means the trousers are a great candidate. So I'm going to be starting out here, and I'm also going to pick out his hat too. Now, as I'm doing this, I am going to be careful of avoiding anything that's going to be yellow, so that base coat in the yellow is going to be nice and easy, but anything else doesn't really matter at this stage because we'll neaten up as we add further base coats onto the model. Now the black's blocked in, I'm going to be moving on to the other prominent colour, which is that yellow, and to get things going I'm going to go for more of a mustard yellow for a nice firm base coat. So here I'm going to use some darks on yellow, and to apply it I'm sticking to the same brush, so it's the size 1 again. Now this is another base coat where we just want to take care to block in these particular areas, which as I mentioned are going to be the shirt and the feather. So with the paint thinned and ready we can start doing that, and the only part I'm going to be careful of avoiding with this colour is going to be the black, and instead just make sure we're neat and tidy around that, otherwise it's just a matter of blocking in all the parts that need to be yellow. And with that, we've now got those two main colours blocked in. So it's time to start base coating a variety of smaller details. And I'm going to start out with a number of browns for various things like leathers and stuff like that. So to begin with, I'm going to start with a dark cold brown for some leather areas. And this is going to be some scorched earth, which I'm going to be using on his glove and also on his jacket. Now with that done, I'm then going to move on to boar hide, so a much lighter, warmer brown. And this is going to be for leather straps. And after that, I'm going to use some noble steed brown, and this is going to be for his hair. Finally, I'm going to go for a more neutral brown for the wooden detail on his pistol, and for this I'm going to be using some dust bowl. Now first of all I'm going to use some scorched earth, and to apply this I'm going for the size 1 brush once again, and it's a matter of just making sure a small amount of this is thinned down and ready, and then there are some quite specific areas I'm going to be picking out with it. First of all there's going to be his jacket across the middle of the miniature, so we're looking at around here, and now we really need to be careful of avoiding that yellow and the black, but I'm also going to use this on his dueling glove just here, and there's a little van brace on the other arm just here that I'm going to get as well. I also decided to base coat his shoes with that colour, and with that done I'm now going to move on to boar hide. So this is a much warmer, much more reddish brown, and to apply it I'm going for a slightly smaller brush here. This is a size 0 just for a bit more control, because now I'm looking for all the straps and belts. Next up, it's time to base coat the hair. For this one, I've chosen to go for some noble steed brown, and again I'm just going to take care around areas such as the hat as I block this in. And then finally I'm going to move on to some dust bowl, and this is first of all going to be to base coat the wooden parts of his pistol, but I'm also going to use this as the colour for his socks too. And now that's done, those main base coats are blocked in, but there are still the metallics to go before we can put the wash across the miniature. And so I'm going to start out with some gold. Here for the base coat, I'm using Dragon's Gold, and then we'll do the silver too. And here I'm going to go for some Surcoat Silver. But I'm going to start out with Dragon's Gold, which I'm applying using the size 0 brush again. And here I'm just looking for a few metal details, such as the crossguard and pommel of his sword just around here. So again, just being really careful with the glove as I go. But also, I think I'm going to use it on the butt of his pistol too, on this little metal design we've got around here. And then it's time to move on to silver. So here I've got some Surcoat Silver, and this is first of all going to be for the blade of his sword, but then it's also going to be used for the metal details of his pistol. Now that's done, I've reached the point of applying all the base coats that can share a dark brown wash, so it's time to apply it. And for this I'm going to be going for some Battle Mud wash applied using a medium shade brush from Citadel, because there's a lot of ground to cover here, so a large brush like this is going to be ideal. Now for an all over wash like this on your miniatures, what you should do is just load up a good generous amount of the paint and then just start painting it all across the model. But when you are putting this amount on, you do need to be careful to make sure that you don't overdo it, because it's very easy for a lot of this to start collecting in areas and really starting to clog up detail. So as you apply, you need to watch out for it pooling, such as what we're getting on top of the arm just there. Now if you ever spot something like that happening when you're washing like this, just use your brush like a sponge to move away the excess to bring it down more in line with something there like that. And once it's painted all over, give the model plenty of time to dry. So for something like this, I'd be leaving it for 45 minutes before moving on to the next stage. With that wash now completely dry, we can move on to the next stage, which is to painting the skin. I always like to do this about halfway through painting the miniature to add some personality to it. And for this, I'm going to start out with a base coat of Barbarian Brawn. Now once that's on there for the shading, I'm going to go for a warm brown to add a bit of life to it. So I'm going to use some flesh wash for this. But first of all, I'm going to start with Barbarian Brawn, and to apply it, I've gone back to my size 0 brush for this base coat, and for this one, we just need to be careful to avoid surrounding details as it's blocked in. So you can see I'm just making sure I don't have tons of paint on my brush, so that as we start base coating this, we can be careful around that hair. So I just want to gradually block this in like this, just being really careful of the hair and the hat, and I'm also just going to take the time to paint in his hand down here too. Next up, to shade the skin, I'm going to use some flesh wash. I'm just going to apply this thinly all over the skin using the size 0 brush. Now the wash is dry, it's time to clean up the skin and then move on to highlighting it. And the first stage for doing this is going to be to layer it using a slightly lighter tone than where we started. So here I'm going to use some Dwarven skin, and to apply it I'm going for a smaller brush now, using a size 00, which is around about the same size as a small airbrush from Citadel. This is going to be good for this because the face is quite detailed here, so we want lots of control as we block this in. Now to do this, I am thinning down the paint to make sure it's a little bit translucent, and I'm going to go into this expecting to apply it as 2 thin coats. I'm just going to gradually build it up as we go. Now the goal here is to focus on the raised up parts and just be careful to avoid deeper recesses. And I always like to start out with the nose in the middle of the face, so just down here I'm just going to follow that down towards the point of it and then move up towards the brow around there. So just thinly apply it just there directly above the eyes. Then moving down, what we need to do is get the lower eyelid, which is going to be just in there, and then we can move on to the cheeks here, starting with the cheekbone and then gradually moving down. Now you can see, because this is thinned down, that colour is quite translucent, meaning the previous colour is still showing through. This is ideal because as we carry on avoiding those recesses, it means that once it's dry, we can then come back for a second coat, and this time we can be even more selective about the parts we pick out, focusing more towards where the light would catch. So for example, on the cheek, that means towards the top of it, just there, following the cheekbone there, like that. With that done, you can see that we're now bringing out the detail there on the flesh, so we can move on to adding a highlight to really finish it off. And for this, I'm going to go for a lighter tone with some elven skin. To apply it, I'm sticking to the same brush, so it's the size 00 again, and this time with the colour, whilst we're still looking to make it translucent, we're going to be much more selective about what we pick out. We're looking for the parts that really stand out, so the bits that are going to catch the light and the attention. So once you've got the paint thinned and ready, and you remove the excess off the brush, we can then start doing that. And again, I'm going to start out with the nose, and this time it's just going to be a fine line down the centre of it, so just there. Then for the brow, it's going to carefully follow along directly above the eye just there, and then I'm going to skip past the lower eyelid and start picking out the cheekbone just here, so very gently there like that. We also want to go around the mouth and get the jawline too. So all these edges and angles and these bits that stand out, I just want to look for each of those and gently follow along. And here we have the skin with that highlight applied. Now, if you're painting a human like this, you could always leave the skin there if you wanted to, but on this miniature, I want to add a little bit more detail and life to the face to make it look like it's seen a bit of action in the city of the damned. So I'm going to start out by painting the eyes. Now, eyes are quite tricky, and if you don't want to paint them, what I recommend you do is just keep them in shadow with a dark brown or something, just to make them nice and dark there, so you can't really see the detail of it. But if you do want to paint the eyes, what you should do is start out with a pitch black. Now, for this, I'm going to use some Doom Death Black, and then we're going to add in the whites to the eyes, and for this, I'm going to use some White Star. Now after that, I think it'd be cool to add a bit of stubble to the miniature, so here I'm going to use a dark grey. I've got some Dungeon Stone grey, which I'm going to thin right down and glaze onto the face, and then once that's done, we can pick out the teeth, and here I'm going to use some Vampire Fang. But first of all, for the eyes, we need that pitch black, so I'm using Doom Death Black, and you definitely want to go for your smallest brush for this, so I'm using my size 00 once again. What you need to do with your black is thin it down so it's just a little bit inky, so down to... touch more water there, down to about this sort of consistency here, see, so it's a little bit runny. And then really importantly, make sure you remove the excess paint off your brush, there's hardly anything there. Just draw up a small amount, and really that's all you're going to need. And with this, just brace your hands to be as steady as possible, being nice and steady on the miniature, and just bring your brush in gently and just run it into the deepest part of the eye. So we're looking at just in here as a line there like that. Next up, we can move on to the white. So here I've got some White Star, which I thinned down just like I did with the black, and using the tip of the small brush, you just want to add a dot of this on either side of that black line we applied in the previous stage. Now the eyes are done, the next thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of stubble onto his face here to make him appear more like a veteran. And to do this, I've got some Dungeon Stone Grey, which I've heavily thinned down with water, and I'm just going to apply a very thin coat over the areas where we get the hair growths. So you can see I'm just going down over the chin and also the top lip just around here too. And then finally, I've just got a very small amount of Vampire Fang, and with this, and still using the size 00 brush, I'm just going to gently pick out his teeth, just with a few dots of this colour. And there we have it, the face is complete, and you can see what I mean about it adding a lot of character to the miniature, and that will really just bring it to life at this point. So with that done, we can now return to previous colours we painted in, and we'll start out with that yellow, where we're just going to clean it up and make it a little bit brighter with some layering. So I'm going to go back to the first colour we used here for the yellow, which was Dark Sun Yellow, and to apply it, I'm going for the size 0 brush for this one. And what I'm going to do with the colour this time is reapply it into the same sort of area, but this time I'm going to purposely avoid all the recesses that we encounter. So for example, on the sleeve just here for his arm, what I'm going to aim for are these raised up creases, such as along here, but wherever we've got more shading, I'm just going to be careful not to quite drop into the deepest recess. So really just focusing on areas just there like that to clean up that colour. Now when it comes to the feather on his hat, in this case what I'm going to do is allow the paint to fall into the more shallow recesses that appear on either side, so around here. I'm going to be careful just to avoid a few of the deeper ones, just to add a little bit of that texture on there, and also I'm just going to be careful not to drop into that central ridge down the middle. Now that's been cleaned up, I'm going to take the yellow a little bit further and make it a bit more bright and punchy by layering over the top of that with a brighter yellow. Here I'm going to be using some Skulky Yellow. Now with that done, I'm going to start adding in a little flash of red onto the miniature using some Sanguine Scarlet, and then it's going to be time to layer the silver on the sword blade and the pistol. For this, I'm going to return to Surcoat Silver. Now finally what I want to do is also just brighten up the brown that appears on the jacket. And it's going to be quite subtle, but I just want to separate it a bit from the black that's surrounding it. So for this, I'm going to return to some Scorched Earth. But first of all, I'm going to add that brighter yellow, so I'm using Skulky Yellow, and I'm going for the same brush here, so the size 0 again, because this is going to be more or less the same kind of technique, only I'm going to be just a bit more selective about what parts I avoid. I'm now looking to avoid all the shallower recesses as well, and just really focus on those raised up parts to make them a bit more punchy. So with that paint prepared, we can start looking for such areas, and for example on the arm just here, that means what I'm going to be doing is painting it on areas such as towards the top of the shoulder just there, very thinly, bringing it down to close to that recess, but not going quite into it. So I'm just letting some of that more mustard yellow show through as it gets darker into that corner. Same is going to be true in these creases, where again I'm just going to be a bit more selective, almost like a highlight, aiming for the more raised up areas. Now when it comes to the feather, in this case, just going to make sure there's not much paint on the brush. With the side of the bristles, I'm just going to gently skim along like this, just to pick out the raised texture all the way along. Next up, I've decided to add a flash of red onto the miniature, so here I'm using Sanguine Scarlet. And I'm just going to look for little opportunities to put this in, for example this patch of fabric that we've got here on the knee, and also things such as the grips of any weapons, like his sword just in here. Next up, I'm going to do some layering on the silver using Surcoat Silver, and this is first of all going to be for the sword blade to make it look clean and well maintained, but also I'm going to be doing the same thing on the barrel of the pistol too. And then finally, I'm going to return to Scorched Earth and layer this onto the jacket. So once again, aiming for the flat areas and being careful to avoid any recesses. And with that done, the layering is completed, so I'm now going to move on to highlighting the miniature. When it comes to a model like this, I always recommend starting out with the main colours for the highlights here to really focus on the important ones. And so that means what we'll do is start out with the black, and here I'm going to highlight it with a dark grey and use some Dungeon Stone grey for this. Once that's done, we can move on to the yellow, and here I'm going to use some Craven yellow. Then also I think the red's quite important because it really does stand out. So for this, I'm going to use some Demon red for the highlight. But first of all, I'm going to use Dungeon Stone Grey, and to apply this one, I've gone back to my size 00 brush for lots of accuracy, and here we're looking for the peaks and creases on the black parts of the fabric. So with the paint thinned down and under control, we can start looking for those things. And so, for example, on the trousers, we first of all do have the stitching pattern, which you can see on the back just here. So I am going to highlight this edge, just following the tip of the brush along that line there like that. But also creases on the legs, such as around here, are really good things to pick out too. So again, just a line following the peak of each one. Now on the hat is going to be a highlight following the outer hem as well. So with this, we can use the side of the brush. I'm just going to skim along like this. Next up, I'm going to highlight the yellow too, and for this I'm using some Craven yellow, and the application is going to be just the same as with the black, where we're looking for the peaks of creases. I want to gently follow each one, such as around the elbow here on the sleeve. You can see I'm just following those raised bits of texture around like that. But also we can use this as a fine highlight on the feather, and for this I'm again making sure I don't have much paint in the brush. You can always test it here on your thumb like that. And with the side of the brush, just very lightly skim towards either side of the feather, so just focusing along here. And then finally we can move on to the red, and here I'm using some Demon Red for the highlight, and the procedure is just the same as what we've just done on the yellow, again looking for any edges or textures that stand out and following each one. Now that's done, we've finished highlighting the main colours on the miniature, but there's a host of browns that we need to do now, so we're going to move on to those, starting with that dark cold brown that we used on the jacket and the dueling glove and all those details. So for this, we want a lighter shade of that kind of brown, so here I'm going to be using some Ancient Forest. Now once that's done, we can move on to the warmer brown we use for the belts, and here I'm going to go for some fur cloak, and then it's going to be time to move on to his hair, and for this, again we want a lighter shade than what we originally went for, so here I'm going to use some dry rust brown. Finally, we need a more neutral brown, and this is going to be to highlight the wood stock of his pistol. So here I'm going to use some sandstone. But first of all, we need some Ancient Forest, and to apply it, I'm going to stay with the small brush. So it's the size 00 again, and this is going to be the same kind of approach that we did on the fabrics, where we're looking for creases and edges that really stand out. So, for example, on the front of it here, you can see we've got the opening on the front of his jacket. What we want to do with the tip of the brush is just follow that edge as neatly as possible, along with any creases that we can find. Next up, I'm moving on to some fur cloak, and this is going to be to highlight all the belts and straps. So I'm again still using the size 00 brush, and I'm just going to highlight the outer edges of each one. Next up, I'm going to add a highlight to the hair, and for this I'm going for some dry rust brown, just to have a different shade from the browns I've used elsewhere, and still with the size 00 brush, I'm just going to pick out gently some of that raised up texture. And then finally, I'm just going to use a small amount of sandstone to add a highlight first of all onto the wood of the gun. So with the tip of the brush, again, I'm looking for any edges, such as just along the side of the barrel right there. But also, I'm going to use this as a fine highlight on the jacket, just looking for the parts that really stand out and just adding a little flick of this colour to those bits too. And with that now done, the model is very nearly finished. All we need to do is highlight the metallics, and then we can add a little bit of dust around his feet. And for the metallics, we'll start out with the gold. Here I'm going to highlight with a white gold, so I'm using glistening gold. And then for the silver, I want a really bright silver, so I'm going to use mithril blade for this one. But we'll start out with glistening gold, and to apply it, I'm going for that same brush, so again, the size 00, and we're just looking to pick out the bits that catch the light on the golden details. So for example, on the crossguard and pommel of his sword, that would be areas such as the rounded parts we've got on either end. So just there, just add a flick of that gold towards the top, and just there, following all these edges where the metal would catch the light. And with that done, we can then do the same thing onto the silver, and here I'm using some mithril blade. So for example, the cutting edge of the sword, but also we can use this to pick out any buckles that might appear in the miniature as well, such as this one across the chest right here. And with that done, there's now just one more detail I want to add to the miniature, and that is some dust around his feet to look like he's seen some action. So for this, what I'm going to use is some dust bowl, which I'm just going to lightly dry brush onto the miniature. So do it. I'm using a small dry brush from Citadel. I'm just going to get a small amount of the paint on the brush. Really don't need very much. Then get some tissue and use it to work it into the bristles whilst also removing excess paint. Now, once it's down to around about this sort of strength here, we're then ready to start applying it. And all we need to do with this is just lightly start brushing it around the feet and towards the bottom of the trousers. And you can see the results. It looks nice and dusty. Now, with this done, it's then going to be time to base the miniature. And for this one, I am, of course, going to be going for an urban rubble base to represent the ruined streets of Mordheim. And with that base now fully painted, this swordsman from Avaland is complete and ready to seek his fortune and glory in the cursed streets of Mordheim. So I've really enjoyed painting this miniature because it's brought back a lot of memories, and I must admit I am somewhat jealous that Roger managed to find such a good quality copy of the game on eBay, because I don't have one. I do have a copy of the rulebook, but that's about it. But this has really inspired me to have a go at painting a warband on my own, which I think would be really fun, and hopefully I can get some of the guys in the office to play with me. Now, if you're also interested in playing Mordheim today, then you can certainly do so, and you don't need to seek out an expensive copy on eBay. The resources are all quite easy to find online, so a quick Google search will find you some stuff, and then you can always use modern miniatures to play it too. So I hope this has inspired you, and we'll see you again very soon.